Well, I'll begin at where the introduction left me. It's great to be here. It is great to be in a space of new and critical thinking. I presented a documentary. Leah Nerida, Frank Stapleton and myself travelled to Rio in 1992, and the documentary was called 7 Days to Save the World. And in a way, I conducted the interviews with all sorts of people, but it was the beginning of things going very wrong in relation to language. It was at that conference that the concept of sustainable development was used widely. An Assistant General Secretary of the United Nations, Maurice Strong, organised the conference, but it'll tell you how strange it was. The Business Council for Sustainable Development was invented just immediately before the conference, and the chairman of that was the head of Nescafe. The vice chairman was the vice president of Fiat. I interviewed them all, but they were given full recognition as if they were in fact a member of the United Nations. While at the same time, I remember going and filming some pieces with Greenpeace, and all of the atolls and islands in the Pacific were not represented because, of course, they were colonies and other countries were supposed to be speaking on their behalf. Holland and all these other many European Union countries. But I think that what I saw happening then was the importance of language, and all I've just said in my 5 minutes that my daughter tells me I was to speak here is that I want to just say how this went wrong. What happens when the word sustainable is not respectable anymore because it is being massively abused? But really the problem is older than that. The problem goes back to what I think is the misuse of the word enlightenment. And what I want to say about people who are trying to think out new ways is that you really have to think about a new enlightenment. The enlightenment, so-called, was something that came out of a period of empire. And when that great period of the end of the 17th and 18th century, when empire was being established across the world, it was done with a set of assumptions about indigenous people, particularly. First, that they were less than human, then that they had no souls, then that they weren't using their agriculture properly, and so on. So one of the big issues in Rio was that complete ignoring of indigenous peoples. And at the background of it was that old philosophical notion about one that simply said that we were on an unending path to progress, and that you were stamping out ignorance, and that science would in fact create a kind of a universal system that would be automatically of benefit. There were good people who wrote against it, odd people like Denis Diderot and others in France, and they said, look, the phrase they used curiously was, they said, when people from Europe go into these places, they're like feral tigers. That was the word they actually used. And I think that as it went on, and as things became justified this question of empire, that's when in fact the division takes place. I wrote my very first article when I was very much younger, in 1978, on the breakup of the symmetry that was there between nature and the rest of the world. In the period I'm talking about, Francis Bacon said, a well-respected philosopher in his day, wrote, I lead to you nature and her children in bondage for your use. And that powerful phrase that justifies empire, that justifies patriarchy, that justifies the despoiling of nature, was the dominant centre concept in the idea of progress that followed into the 19th century. So my message is very simply then, all the serious writers in economics in the 18th century, the 19th century, all wrote about morality and philosophy before they wrote about economics. And what is really necessary, Adam Smith's The Theory of Moral Sentiments is a good example before his Wealth of Nations. So it's necessary to reconnect ethics and morality with economics, and both with the issues that are there in ecology. But the big difference that struck me at the end of the 1970s was the work that was coming from Geoffrey Bateson and people like that. And they said that over on the eastern side of philosophy, people were saying it is possible to work in symmetry with nature. As a partner, it's possible to respect diversity. It's possible to take indigenous wisdom and its insights and do new things. But over on the other side, if you don't make economics accountable, either to politics or to philosophy, and if you go on regarding something that is clearly collapsing and doing disastrous results, particularly for people who are threatened by all the particulars you know so much more than I do about climate change, nomadic peoples and so forth. So therefore what is necessary is a new enlightenment that will integrate moral thinking, questioning inevitabilities, moving on. And Raymond Williams said, it's only when we have done that, question the inevitabilities that are bogus, that we've taken our first steps in a journey of hope. There is possible to do all of that, but all around the world and our shared planet, it is possible to pick up different pieces of indications of how people can live in a clear and sustainable way. But in the end of the day, it's rather like this, as we say in Irish, we scar Céile Marmid. You either line up behind a kind of a selfish, unrestrained kind of radical individualism, or you say, really, beyond oneself one has obligations to others. Beyond that, in turn, one has obligations to other generations, and intergenerational justice matters. But it's possible to do something quite beautiful by putting the pieces together again, making a new symmetry, creating a new enlightenment where science and technology, as they're delivered to us, no longer threaten, but are used as instruments of healing and putting together our shared vulnerable planet. Thank you for listening to my few words.